Hey, and welcome to another episode of Tea with Leigh. I'm very privileged today to have a former schoolmate from Shepherd University who is also a poet, a fiction writer, an essayist, a father, which I didn't realize, of two children, including a 6-year-old, a book festival founder, and many, many other things, teacher. And Stephan Viau is with us. I'm very
Yes.
pleased to speak with him today. And Stefan, it has been a number of years, as we were speaking about before we started recording. And as I said, we're reconnecting through a screen, which feels so much like COVID-19 all over again. And
Right. Yes.
also sort of reflecting upon the amount of time it's been that has passed since we last spoke, which seems like it was just a moment, but is apparently much more than that. So I
Yeah.
also want to remind folks that for the purposes of listening to this podcast, they should either acquire a cat to sit with them, perhaps a capybara. I have this wonderful little stuffed capybara.
Yeah. He's adorable.
For
Yeah.
those who are watching on the video component, I had a different one yesterday, and you have to watch every episode to see the different capybaras. So at this juncture, Stefan, it's the Tell Me About You segment. The floor is yours.
Yes.
Tell us everything we need to know and make it a phenomenal story.
Italy, thank you so much for having me. It is really lovely to see you. I think the last time we saw each other was actually when you invited me to read a portion of my thesis, which was also virtual, when you were working at the Four Seasons bookstore. I may have been in the process of writing it or something along those lines, and you had begun doing a virtual reading series through I believe, the Facebook page of the Four Seasons bookstore. So that was the last time I think we saw each other. Very lovely to see you. And thank you for giving me the floor here. My plan with this, sort of as a poet, is that I'll talk only a little bit about myself and my background. I'll mostly talk about the book that's coming out, which is a product of that thesis that was originally written back in 2019 and 2020, before the birth of my first son, actually, and kind of parallel to that whole change in my life. And I'll talk about that particular book. I'd also like to read some segments of that book and pause between certain sections to sort of talk about the process of writing, sort of where my head was at with it, and like formally what the book is doing, what I hope it's doing. Not to sort of lead the witness, because I think poetry obviously is open to interpretation, but sometimes it's nice to read sort of an introduction to, or something that will act like an introduction to the book of poems before you get into it, when formally it's doing something that not everyone has a direct line to, or a direct kind of history with or cue into. So for me, if you read my bio line on anything that I publish, you'll see that it says I have an MFA, which is true. I have an MFA in poetry from Louisiana State University. I graduated in 2020, which still feels very, very recent, but also very, very long ago in a writing perspective, thinking about how much my writing has changed. I originally graduated from Shepherd University, where we met each other in 2013. And after that time, I was really interested in making my English degree help me to travel and see the world. I saw others, friends of mine who had gone to, many of my friends went to Ivy League schools or were studying things like engineering, and they were really focused on money and getting like forming a future or building a future that would get them lots of money. They learned about investing and things like that. And I was always really mathematically inclined throughout high school, but there was a lean in me toward the arts much more than my very closest friends. And I think that there was a story that I couldn't sort of get away from wanting to tell. And it had a lot to do with my childhood. And still, when you're a teenager, your childhood and memories about your childhood only are slightly there, and you don't really know how and why it is that your childhood is still affecting you. But the more you grow up, it sort of creeps into your everyday life. In this book, it actually becomes a sort of toothache that is always at the back of the mouth, a sort of little inkling feeling that you can't stop kind of playing with, something that you can't get away from. And many times it's a tooth that presents with pain. And so, when people come across this in the book, I hope that they will interact with it as if it is that carried over remembrance of childhood, the kind of complicated memories that childhood sort of leaves us with. The book itself, I guess I went to Shepherd University and graduated with a degree in English and creative writing. I actually never took a poetry class at Shepherd University because it didn't come up in rotation, and I was still declared as a creative writing concentration, and I said that my emphasis was poetry. My thesis there was translations of Pablo Neruda into French and then back into English for some reason. I'm still kind of confused about that capstone project, but it was an interesting endeavor. From there, I wanted my English degree to make me travel, as I said earlier, and I was accepted into the Peace Corps. I was set to go to Cameroon to build schools and to do other kind of infrastructural work there. And ultimately, with a little bit of looming school debt, Shepherd isn't the most expensive of schools, but I was very scared because I had paid for the whole thing myself, or the government had helped me with these crazy loans, had helped me to pay for it. And I got the opportunity, speaking to Carrie Messenger, a very lovely advisor and friend of ours now. She suggested to me, like, why don't I consider teaching English abroad, which is often an aspect of the Peace Corps, but just only teaching and finding jobs that pay. So I applied to the JET program, or I wanted to apply to the JET program in Japan, and I actually left that application unfinished. Ultimately, at that time, Korea was more paying, and so I ended up teaching English in Korea for over 5 years. I was in Busan the first year, but then in Seoul the rest of my time there. Met the lady who ended up becoming my partner, my wife, and we moved back here so that I could pursue my master's degree, my MFA from Louisiana State University. And after the birth of my son and after graduating, it was high COVID times. And so we wanted to kind of triangulate our way back toward family. And this is where my family is, in this region. So now I'm here. And the point or the game there was just find any job that would pay and that would allow me to relocate my family up here. And that became public school teaching, which is something I swore I would never do here, despite my background being filled with teaching. And now I really love it. I revere it. I think it's a terrible and wonderful profession. There's a lot to say about it, which we can leave for another time. But I am very happy as a French teacher here in Frederick County Public Schools in Maryland. So about the book itself, the book that's newly released, it's coming out in July. The release date is July 24th, 2026, through Finishing Line Press. They've been very generous with accepting my work. They've been very generous with helping me in creating the art for it, helping it, come to fruition concept-wise with some of the images that are in it, which there's a lot of like TV static images, and I can maybe talk about that too a little bit later. The book is called Heirlooms because it sort of began as an investigation into this idea of childhood and what we sort of take away, what we bring with us, what we can't not bring with us, what we can't leave behind, despite maybe wanting to leave behind. Not necessarily always traumatic memories from childhood, but complicated memories that we only half remember, memories that we misremember. When, I would go to see my family or recall things, my sister would tell that story a different way. And my mom or my dad would, either of them would say, that's not how it happened at all. And so it's sort of those like grandiose memories from childhood and how they seem so significant and powerful, and then misremembering them. And so that's what I think our parents and our families sort of inadvertently give us. So without further ado, I think I'm just going to hop in and read 2 different sections from it. After the first section, I'll pause, talk a little bit more about, formally what it's like on the page and sort of what I was going for with some of the images and word choice and what I was hoping to convey. And then I'll read a little bit more from it. So, all right, this is about maybe halfway through. I don't write any poems with titles. I only find myself writing long form poetry books where each poem is slightly connected. And they're not epic poems, but they are book length poems that sort of are all poems that sort of talk to each other. So here we go. I couldn't sleep until a few hours in the morning. I dreamt of being a student a little longer. Today, I'm cleaning up the dust from the air. After a month of cleaning, I'm going to take a nap. I'm going to look through photographs and find us not yet wavering. In the end, a home is a stitched-up village. It is hung by heritable heartstring. You never did return the phone call. It must have been from unforgettable sorrow. You rummaged around an awful season and dreamt of tangents in the afternoon. The room, it reeked of air conditioning. Everything pulsed on and off like a heart monitor. I couldn't see outside the rain-swept window. I saw a televised kitchen you didn't see. I was peering in at water's wake. I was also faintly crying. When I was young, the time filled in granularly. The sky was bent in groves. On the day I was given this, I knew I could have been a hummingbird. Who is less anxious and amphibious? Who sips the bending rose? This is a placard board. On it are insensible acts. Hi, Mom. I'm leaning on the TV in this one. I'm searching for a deeper feeling. That's where the toothache angles in. And carrying on is like a slow film. The toothache is the televised constituent. It is. The kitchen rewound. Mom is here. I'm so wrapped up in Christmas paper. Was it only for an afternoon? Each seam sewn unraveling, as though the morning and you had split up. No, you said, this is a solid earthquake. No, I just want to float forever down the hallway. What did Dad call to say? Can I ask you what went on in that kitchenette? I want to, but I can't help but sleep quietly. I've become a skin at the edges. What will even notice? There is dust in that corner. There's no such thing as justice. So, in conceiving this book, I was reading a lot of Chelsea Minnis at the time. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Chelsea Minnis. Chelsea Minnis is a phenomenal writer, a very feminist writer, and sort of is a kind of nominal voice in the girlesque movement, but not in the kind of grotesque girlesque. Is just really, really kind of known as having these lovely non sequitur lines, writes poetry in essentially full sentences with full stops at the end of each line. And then, moves on to the next line. Each poem is maybe 5 or 6 lines long and read very much as non sequiturs, but imagistically something forms and bleeds between the lines. The enjambment is really kind of, it becomes the job of the reader to sort of feel the enjambment and where the leakage between meaning in line to line happens. And I was just like really, really in love with that writing. And I wanted to do something similar. So I just like started practicing non sequitur after non sequitur and seeing what would happen, just like stark image after stark image, and seeing, well, where do these connect and what sort of happens. Did a lot of writing outside. And this, I think, started a lot more naturalistic. But I couldn't stop as a very like indoor person myself, though I think that's changing as my years progress. I love the outdoors so much now, but I kept writing about sort of a room and being stuck in a room. And in the same way that one might be stuck in a single room, the room that one writes in, you can be stuck with a memory that sort of replays or that you recount or that keeps coming up, whether that's of childhood or of any other time in your life. So I started exploring this idea that maybe these are all the same poem and they're just reiterations of the same poem. They're all the same memory and they're just reiterations of the same memory. But just like real life, there is some felt sense of progression, right? The leakage here in my work that I hope for is that we feel by the end, though there doesn't seem to be much growth, you feel the narrator who is speaking here has grown simply because he or she has encountered the memory so many times, has encountered it, has reshaped it, has reformed it. And in that way, the work sort of became cubist, where it was just looking at this one thing, but shattered at a bunch of different angles. You've basically played with this memory until it becomes this like new, bizarre amalgam that is simultaneously still dangerous, but has become this thing that you can look at sharp angles sometimes and then at more rounded and softer angles at other times. So I really wanted to sort of play with that idea. And Laura Glenham, who was my advisor there in my MFA program, immediately just called it cubist. And since then, I haven't been able to kind of get the word out of my mind about this particular work. All right, I'll read a little bit more if that's okay, and then I'll stop there. I appreciate it, Leigh. Thank you for giving me the time. So I think I'm going to read from here. So there's a jump here, but I hope people can feel, again, this sort of like, this is recurring. There's something, recurring in here, the image, the tone,
and
the
if
diction.
they can't, all the more reason to go buy the book.
That's right. They should see for themselves. All right. I'm not concerned because I did not do anything. But why was I soaked and heartbroken? Mom, the front door creaking shut tricked me in the night. Mom, was that a lonely droplet from your eye? I wish now we could sing an unsung blossom. Call it tea time in the valley of the rain. Wow, how soon the kitchen light closes in. It could be a necessary condition. It could be that we were given this. So I was taken out of water and put back in. When the tooth aches, it smacks the face. Last time you called, you couldn't muster, dear heart, be pretty. Who else will be tied along this heartstring? I sweep and I weep. This cradle now around the room, that's a tiny canyon peak. That's an eventful circumstance. But we are eventual, and eventually. The coursing kitchen light does everything in its place. Does a circumference frenzy ache? There looks to be a lighter alternative, but no wholesome otherness. How did the floodlight reach this far? I called the TV rich, and I pampered other weather. I wish there was a larger cup to put this in light of the encroaching rain. This is a growing community. I heard when a melon eats, it tugs at the vine. That TV is acting toothsome these days. It makes a resounding call. It used to be a kind of capacity void. Now the kitchen light is mirrored here. Now that's a ripe melon. Up the wall is where you hung the structure. Is that how we put an essential feeling? The toothache is a night-light swoon. And when I creep into the kitchen for a cup, it's something motherly. I am asunder. I am this litany. I sense the season coming now. Can you also feel your interpretation fold? These days the mouth is dry and aging. I watch the TV lightly lean. At a slightly hour, I watch TV. Is every part of us deviled so evenly? Seeming better, I wrote the auspice piece. Mom, I remember the kitchen well. Wasn't it a haunting image? You used to belt in the composition. Maybe it was a swollen tongue, a punctured starlet through. I'll read just one more. It is not an autumn flavor to remember. It is not a faithful time warp. The TV is for effortless turmoil. I call it a soaking trail. Oh, this toothache takes all afternoon. This light, it takes good molten care. Thank you, Leigh. I hope people will see sort of what I see in this book and check it out. It should be coming out. It is open for pre-order right now with Finishing Line Press. I'm sure I'm plug it again at the end, and I can talk about some of the other books that I've written too that are already out. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephan. And there's a video component here for those who are just listening, and sort of throughout what you were reading, I continually was looking down and kind of moving around because I have existing notes, but they're all handwritten now because there's so many things that I want to ask you. And the format that I like to do is to present some questions to the guest prior to them joining so they aren't caught short. I'm not sure I'll ask you any of the questions that I sent you in advance, so I may just ask
Okay, no, that's fine.
these handwritten ones. But and the capybara has lots of questions too.
Yes,
So
please.
we now move into sort of like one of the little silly segments, which is part of why it's called Tea with Leigh. And this is our tea break. So it's
Did you
customary.
notice I read a tea poem? I
Yes,
did on purpose. Yes, I did that on
appreciate
purpose for
it.
you.
And this is the portion where I share whatever tea I'm drinking today. And as I told you earlier, I was very late in starting our recording. So I'm surprised this turned out okay. But I have just regular peppermint tea, but I have my Sherlock
Oh,
Holmes mug,
beautiful.
Unemployed Philosophers Guild. So I know the answer, but I'll ask you anyway. Are you a tea drinker?
Well, Leigh, things change over the years, and I I absolutely love a mint tea. We have this mint plant in our garden that went absolutely rampant, and it's a peppermint plant. But over the years, it's just gotten like it dies every winter and then it comes back. It comes back like more than before, but it's got this like this bite to it that's kind of just really beautiful. My wife and I started wondering, what do we do with all of this mint? We started like rubbing things like marinades, including mint in it, so that we'd have it with like pork chops and things. Well, we dried a significant portion of it, and I've been having mint tea. I make mint coffee lattes by concentrating some of the mint tea at the bottom of a latte. So I do love a mint tea, and so I'm very excited to hear you're drinking a peppermint tea. There's something very, very relaxing about it.
And what is your favorite beverage?
So right now, actually, I prepared my little beverage here. I'm surprised I had time as well, running around like a chicken with my head cut off after school every day. But I don't know if you know this, Leigh, but I run a coffee roasting company. It's very small, but I roast coffee at home. I'm a home roaster. And so my main beverage is coffee. We always have too much coffee at home. It has certainly affected my sleep over the years, which is why right now I'm actually drinking just a shot of espresso from a decaffeinated coffee. This is a blend of Brazil and Ethiopia. and it's just really lovely. Nowadays, with specialty coffee quality, I feel like you can get even tea like notes and wine like notes out of coffee. And yeah, so I'm a very heavy coffee drinker. People want to check out my company, it's Nara Coffee Stand, Nara, Nara.
We'll add that to the list of things in the short amount of time that we have not been in the same general area that has
Yeah,
happened that I did not know. So
yeah.
note of
We sell
that.
at like farmers markets and stuff. So I'll give you some though. I know you don't drink much coffee, but I'll give you some.
So definitely espresso for
Okay.
me and lattes and so forth. One of the things that has repeatedly come up, and I'm going to pose the question to you. So in episode one, we had a new friend, Jackson Howell, who is running for West Virginia House of Delegates out in Clarksburg, which is about
Mm-hmm.
3.5 hours from here. And then the second episode, we had Austin Huff, and they had differing opinions about this. And if I vote, Austin and I, our side's winning. So,
Okay.
opinion
Okay.
on sweet tea.
Oh, sweet tea. I'm not about it.
Okay, so we're
I
winning. Thank you.
okay. Are you also on sweet tea, Lee?
Yes, I cannot
Okay.
abide tea that has been sweetened so much so, and this is going to be boring for someone who listened to the previous episode with Austin. I am the sort of person who, if I ordered chicken at a restaurant and I don't eat beef or pork, and someone sat down a plate of beef in front of me, I would just eat around it. I wouldn't send it
Okay.
back because I'm
Okay.
that
Okay. Yes.
neurotic
Yes.
about like people who are in customer service positions. I know their work is hard, and I don't want to make their work harder.
Yeah.
The one
You've almost
exception,
completely transitioned to be British, I think.
well, one tries.
Yeah. One tries.
The thing that I cannot abide is in the instances when I have to go to McDonald's and get unsweet tea. If they hand me sweet tea, that is the only
Hmm.
time I will spin right around and say, "No, I'm sorry, I can't deal with this."
Oh man, I'd love to see that. I agree. Having lived in Louisiana, my gosh, it's another capital of sweet tea drinking. It's just everywhere. I just don't like sugar as much. It may be also getting older, but I was never a huge fan. I I think I liked the bitter notes in certain things, in certain drinks, and in tea and in coffee. I almost want there to be a little bit of a bitter bite to it. I'm not seeking burnt coffee or anything like that wherever I go, or tea that's like too extracted. But certainly, I'll drink an unsweet tea well before I drink a sweet tea as well.
So I don't go there as much anymore, unfortunately, but I have standing orders at the Lost Dog, an
Yes.
institution in Shepherdstown. And almost every tea that I order has hibiscus added to it,
Oh yes.
which
It's
smells
so sweet,
horrible.
but it's so nice.
Well, but it sort of adds some, I think, tartness to it. Uh, so I have to go even one step further. So currently, three for no sweet or unsweetened
Yes.
tea, one for sweet tea. I'm
Lovely.
sorry, Jackson, but he's going to win his primary, so he doesn't care about
He
that.
is. Yes.
So,
Good. I hope so.
and anyone listening in Clarksburg, vote for Jackson if you haven't. So I do want to transition to some questions. And like I said, I provided you a list of questions, but I don't think I actually want to ask any of those.
I may not have even previewed them, Lee,
Okay,
so
well, that
I'm ready for it.
we're you'll be fine.
Okay.
So I have to mention because you mentioned Dr. Messenger. We love Dr. Messenger. We love Dr. Pate. I actually had her predecessor for a period, Dr. Alan Tinkler, who forced me to share creative work with others because it's sort of a very private thing before that. But he had a wonderful saying, and I'm butchering it, but the crux of it is there. The reason creative writers read books is so they can find things to steal from their favorite authors for their work. Now, of course, he's not suggesting plagiarism, but he's
No,
suggesting,
no, no.
as you know, influence. And you mentioned Laura Glenham, and
Chelsea
potentially you may
Minnis.
mention other people. So I
Yeah.
mention all of that to say, who currently are you reading, and who is your it doesn't have to be your number one, but within your top five. So who you're currently reading, and then one of your top five authors.
Sure. And I agree with that. I mean, the saying, right? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I think all art is derivative of something else at some point. And we need some kind of influence here. Uh, so right now, I just finished a book called Paradise that I wrote in 3 weeks this past summer, after coming back from visiting my wife's family in Korea. It has nothing to do with that particular trip in Korea, but I wrote it quite quickly and surprised myself. It's very prose-like in its delivery, and I think it's highly influenced from these uh, poems that I was reading at that time, which are actually translations by um, a man named James Shea, who James Pate, our professor friend, is actually quite close with. James Shea did translations of this Japanese writer who writes haikus, and I'm trying to find the name just so that I don't um, butcher it here. But the book is called Applause for a Cloud. It's out on Black Ocean Press, and I was reading that last summer. I don't when I'm writing and I go through like bouts of writing, I kind of stop reading. But this is by Sayumi Kamakura. Applause for a Cloud is the book. And it just has this like phenomenal way of investigating the ways we still have potential as humans to be surprised by nature. And but like in ways that like there's just a lot more evidence of humans as animals in that book in a really sort of productive or interesting way, turning kind of concrete images beautiful, like literal concrete, and cityscapes and things like that, which you don't often see in haiku, which tends to be a very naturalistic sort of mode of writing. And so James Shea's translations are huge. And I mentioned my book Paradise because it was partly influenced having read that. So it has to do with the natural world. But then I had Nathan Hawkes, another great writer, who writes a little bit for Black Ocean and other things. He teaches at the University of Chicago, in the MFA program there. He wrote a book called Nests in Air that I wrote a review for the Hong Kong Review of Books. And it's about parenting in a world where, like, birds' nests are more and more being found to contain plastics of all types and debris, evidence of like human presence. And it's about sort of from that image of birds' nests having this like toxic infiltration. How do our homes and our life and those of us who are parents, um, how do we parent in a world where we're surrounded by toxicity? And it was just such a beautiful book, Nests in Air, when I read it originally and when I wrote that review. So I contacted Nathan Hawkes, who I didn't really know at the time, out of the blue, and just said, hey, I loved your book Nests in Air so much. I wrote this book called Paradise. Would you blurb it? And he blurbed it for me, very, very generously. Wrote beautiful words about it, and so that appears on the back cover of Paradise. Nathan Hawkes also released a new book called The Moony Days of Being, and it's just come out recently, so I recommend people buy it. But he's another great writer who I read a lot of recently.
I've found myself reading almost entirely nonfiction lately. And another note that I have here is hearing you talk about the girlesque and the grotesque and so forth. It's taken me back to when literature and literary criticism and poetry was such an important part of my life,
Yeah.
which has now almost entirely been replaced by politics, political theory, the science of getting people elected. And even though I work in a
Yes.
library, we're not an academic library, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we have academic texts, but a lot of our patrons come in and get romance or mystery, crime fiction, a little bit of sci fi, nonfiction, some literary fiction. But I'm just not in a space where I'm exposed to that as much.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
just sort of feels good to be exposed again. So I'm very excited for the story that I have later, which I think
Yeah. Yeah.
goes into that very well. I'm very
Nice.
excited to start Jim Clyburn's new book, which is about the early African Americans who served in the United States Congress. I'm very
Nice.
excited for that. And I recently read, which I guess is, well, I mean, it is political too, the memoir of Carol Moseley Braun, who was the first African American woman in the U.S. Senate, but who was also an attorney before that. So she sort of goes from her very early beginnings all the way through to now. So very, very different from what would have read at Shepherd. But I miss that availability of poetry and literary fiction and even plays, Dr.
Yeah.
Elsie, a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's nice to hear about that again.
Well, I can guarantee you that it is the moment one graduates out of one of these programs, whether it's an undergraduate or graduate program, it is really, really difficult to remain part of that world. You're almost only in it while you're in a program like that, or if you get a professorial job where you can maintain that sort of you know tone in your own work, tone in your own interest, and in your own hobbies, it really dissipates quite quickly. The world becomes very real outside of those things. Not to say that those texts aren't real or poignant. In fact, they may be very poignant or very, very important to read. I feel very fortunate having gone to AWP, the Writers and Publishers Conference that happens annually, was in Baltimore this past year. And I saw Dr. Pate there. I met Johannes Goranson there, and Nathan Hawks was there. Adam Clay, who teaches at LSU and also blurbed my book, was there. Just really, really lovely to see old friends and to be part of it again. And it just reminded me, like you're saying, sort of that this world exists and that there's just so many texts out there that I would love to read and spend time with. Texts like that, though, sometimes like require a group, like or an audience to kind of talk about it, to really get something deeper out of it, because I can be stirred so deeply by a text, but if I'm not like actively writing a review for it, for something, I won't really have an avenue to talk about it with anyone, and it'll sort of just like I'll forget that I read it or whatever. So I told myself actually, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that I'm only going to read things that I can actually review. And so I've not stuck to that exclusively, but a lot of what I read nowadays, I will write a review for it and then try to send it out. I wrote quite a few for the Colorado review, and then James Shea and I have been in contact about me writing more for the Hong Kong review of books. So
I
it's an
think
exciting way to be part of it.
I think Dr. Tinkler, who I previously mentioned, reviewed for Colorado
Okay,
with
it's
books at one
possible.
point. Hopefully, Alan, if you listen to this, which I don't know how you would or why you would, but choose to, and that's incorrect, please let me know. We miss you in Shepherdstown after all of these years. I've also found, and I don't know if you found this when you were teaching in Korea or now that you're teaching here or anything else that you were doing. So I took a lot of creative writing courses at Shepherd, even though my capstone was literary criticism. It was just sort of where I was at the moment. And I'm finding myself still writing, but everything that I'm writing for the most part is nonfiction. I put out a book about elections in Jefferson County. I wrote a book
Yes,
about the
yes.
woman who founded the Charlestown Library, who was the most impactful philanthropist in Jefferson County's history. And it gave away millions of dollars in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So, inflation.
Yeah.
And also have edited some work of West Virginia writers who are long since deceased. So, I don't know. When
Hmm.
you were teaching, were you still writing creatively? Were you finding that you were writing more reviews, essays? What was?
Yeah, I in Korea, honestly, I almost didn't write at all. And so it was really, really daunting when I thought, okay, what am I doing with my time here? I need to see progression. I want to teach university and not just in after school programs or kind of academy programs in Korea. Though I was the head native teacher there, like in charge of hiring foreign workers from all over the world and interviewing people from Australia, South Africa, Ireland, etc. It was really exciting. I knew that I needed to move on, but I didn't really have a breadth of work at all because my job there in Korea, even being a foreigner and having a lot of the privileges of going home early, whereas other workers and coworkers who were actually Korean couldn't go home, it's still long hours. And so I just didn't work too much. I also traveled a lot while I was there. But before going into my MFA program or applying for MFA program, I decided, well, I've got to write some stuff. So I essentially just set out to write a portfolio the last year I was there, which was probably 2016, I want to say. I just set out to write it, like collect sort of a bunch of like scraps of writing that I had put together, and then a couple essays. I think maybe a few things I wrote, fiction pieces from Shepherd might have shown up, slightly edited in those. I think though currently my mind is a lot more, like you say, sort of analytical, especially when I think being an adult lends itself in many ways to just like having a sort of nonfiction analytical kind of brain. It's not easy where you're just like working to make ends meet to think about, oh, I ought to be creative now, or, you know, I ought to give myself some time, block out some time to just be freely creative. And writing, you know, of this sort is not lucrative in any way, even with an MFA, unless you know, make it really big. And even that's very, very rare. So it's more just like cathartic, and it's about kind of understanding the world. And I think I find myself writing more when there's more I'm confused about in the world, or more I'm kind of trying to investigate, more I'm trying to investigate either internally about myself or about something that has happened to me, like having a son, or, you know, whatever it may be, moving to a new country, relocating my wife and I to, you know, a place that's very far from her home country. And kind of while she's trying to make an understanding of her own, I'm trying to understand what it means to be supportive of her. So those are the moments that I might be writing a little bit more creatively.
I find, and this is perhaps telling too much about myself, but some of the times I wrote creatively, I felt either the best or with the most productivity that was serviceable, not just
Mm-hmm.
writing to write, was in moments of extreme depression,
Sure.
which I don't know that that's, you know,
It's certainly a stereotype of
well,
writing.
but also, you know, someday, God forbid, I run for president, this will be, you know, and that's never going to happen.
No.
But anyway,
By that point, everyone will have had depression.
yeah, unless RFK gets his way. But anyway, I don't want
Yes.
to be taken down already. So, and I also felt like when I was taking creative writing courses at Shepherd, it was sort of a very moody adolescent,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
weird emo kid on the fringe sort of time for me.
Yeah.
And since my mental health has improved, thanks to
Thank
Wellbutrin
God.
and Lexapro, I find it
Yes.
harder to write creatively. I really do.
Oh, okay. Well, certainly, yeah. Being on SSRIs for a portion of my time back from Korea, because gosh, the U.S. is a hell of a place to live. Um, to try to find purpose here is dangerous. But yeah, being on SSRIs, it gave me a weird, like, emotional and creative tunnel vision where I couldn't really get out of like only thinking one way about everything. And so I feel that I understand sort of where you're coming from. It's good to be good and to feel better, certainly, but yeah, at what cost? Actually, what I set out to do in Paradise was sort of exactly like tackling this sort of thing, where I was sick and tired of writing things born out of traumatic experience or depression, or just like negative views or opinions or challenging opinions to the world, and seeing if I could just like write brighter things, nicer things. I love a bike ride in the summer so much. I will, every day of summer, I will go out for a bike ride and end at this little creek deep in the woods where there's a little bike path that I can take my bike to, and I'll set up miniature camp that I've just like packed the stuff on my bike to make a coffee outside, like just a little water boiler and a little cone to filter coffee, and I'll sit there and I enjoy it so much. And sort of out of that experience, I wondered, how am I close to nature, where this is a space where I feel really, really happy and safe, and I feel like I'm healing every moment that I'm out here. And why don't I write about that? And so Paradise sort of became questioning my place in nature and our place as humans in nature, and sort of our desire to, like, why we have a desire to want more, where, even in the case that there may not be more, having that hope, that optimism that there may be something more is everything. And so it was a really hopeful book to me, though I think when people read it, they may find a little bit more like pessimism breaking through a lot more than the optimism. But I think the end result is this person can't stop wanting to be optimistic.
See, my first thought from what you just said, you're in the woods making coffee, a spot only you know about, and clearly a serial killer is going to emerge from the trees, and no one will find you
Yes.
for, like a month.
That's the city dweller in you, Leigh.
I mean, I've lived in rural areas my entire life, although Jefferson County is not really that rural anymore. I think it is more that growing up as a child, I was probably the only person in the second grade who could tell someone what happened on NYPD Blue or Law and Order the previous night.
Okay,
So
yes.
there's that.
That will do it.
So, as I mentioned in the last episode, I've gotten some comments from a few listeners that we need to have more fun questions.
Okay, fun
So,
questions. Yes.
one of the fun questions that was suggested, and I posed this to Austin, is what is your favorite movie?
Oh, geez, you can't ask that unprompted.
Well, let me tell you my second
Okay, okay.
while you think about it. So, yesterday I said Sister Act because I filmed an episode yesterday with Austin. Just because, I mean, Whoopi Goldberg, apparently I was obsessed with her as a child, and who doesn't love
Yeah.
nuns? And they're like revitalizing community and fighting sin. Like, what more do you need as a proud Catholic school graduate? So, the second thing I will say, and this is not a favorite movie, but it's one that I find myself talking about a lot, which I think is very dated and probably slightly offensive to some people now. But I think for its time, it was very progressive. And I remember my mom watching it and having to kind of explain to me what it was about because I was really young. And that's a film called Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, which is about these
Okay, wow.
three people who take part in a drag competition in New York. And the winner gets to go across country by plane to participate in this sort of national program. RuPaul was in it, Patrick Swayze, Denzel Washington, I think. That may not be right. He may have been in it, or Wesley Snipes. I'm sorry, I think it was Wesley Snipes.
Wesley Snipes, wow. Okay.
And there were certainly things about it which now I think would make audiences kind of uncomfortable. It was made in the 90s. But I think it was a good exercise for people like my mom who were very progressive but who were older and seeing sort of the evolution of social acceptance
Hmm.
and then explaining that to a child
Yeah.
at that point. I also just think, I mean, there are just some amazing parts that are very funny. So it's not like my all time favorite films, but I've been talking about it more lately because I like to think about how far we've regressed in our
Okay, yes.
acceptance.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
And I
Unfortunately.
think that's kind of an example that a film from the 90s, I mean, you could even go back and say, well, a film from the 60s if you could highlight one, but a film from the 90s was in some ways more accepting and progressive than a film, almost 40 years later.
Sure.
Still somewhat problematic, and I don't think anyone should watch it and imitate the feelings of some of the people in the films with regard to people who perform in drag. But for its time, I think it kind of hopefully moved some people along. That was a lot longer than I anticipated it being. So
No,
we'll
it's
see.
great. I need to watch this movie. It
Or,
sound have you seen Priscilla, Queen of the Desert?
no, I've seen almost no films. So
Okay, okay.
this
Well, that
question, if I have to respond to it in
yeah,
every
yeah.
episode, is quickly going to become like I'm going to have to go
That
watch
movie.
films.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert is not my favorite movie, but it is. It sounds up the same sort of alley. It must have been early 2000s or maybe like earlier than that. But I believe it's a like New Zealand slash Australian film. But it's about these drag queens that kind of cross the country. Uh, I think in this case, the outback to travel across Australia in order to perform their drag. Um, and that one was a particularly good one. Favorite films, I think I'm going to keep it a little bit light and just go with something that I've seen lately. Like you mentioned, Sister Act. An experience with a movie that I've really loved recently is that my son and I have started reading chapter books at night before bed, and that's really exciting for me. with him because I can see him having more patience, developing patience for texts that don't have pictures and kind of using his imagination. And we recently read Matilda by Roald Dahl, and he just never wanted me to stop reading. Whenever we'd get to the end of a chapter, he needed to know what the Trunchbull did next, and he just felt like what if I was in that school, or I'm so happy my school isn't like that, or are there really principals like the Trunchbull who could do that to a child or to children? And I told him at the end that we would watch the film version of it. And I don't know if anyone who's read the book recently and has had time to compare it to the film, but the film takes so many liberties with it, and actually is a lot less dark than the book. The book is Roald Dahl had been known to sort of be dark, and really kind of like tongue in cheek about his commentary on like society. But the movie took liberties and made the whole thing feel safer. And I didn't have to say that. Like Remy, who's 6, just mentioned right away, like, oh, that was a lot like funnier than the book. That was a lot, nicer. The Trunchbull wasn't as scary in the movie as in the book. And so it was great to have the conversation. So I liked Matilda recently. Also, Danny DeVito is great in that film. So.
I have never seen that, nor have I read
Oh my goodness.
a Roald Dahl book. I mean, I'm aware of them, and sort of some of the plot lines. Although I don't know if you, I just use her first name. I don't know if Kristen was in English ed when you were at Shepherd, but her daughter is named Matilda, and she
Matilda.
frequently comes into the library.
Oh,
And I appreciate so much that she's quite young, but she wants to take lots and lots and lots of books. And I don't
that's
know if
great.
you know this about me, but I have a lot of trouble connecting with people under the age of 70. So I feel like, in some small way, Matilda and a few other folks who come into the library who are under the age of 5 are helping me sort of modify that so that I cannot appear like the, scary guy sitting at.
Curmudgeon.
I don't
Well,
I don't
yeah,
know the
yeah.
curmudgeon. I mean, and I've also learned that you can't just like thrust capybara stickers at children. There has to be a preamble.
Sometimes yeah, I, uh, I totally get what you're saying. I think I'm on a very similar page. I think what's interesting about sometimes, having my son and going to all these birthday parties or the library or whatever and meeting some of his friends, they're not of like, they don't have enough of a formed sort of uh, like aesthetic or uh, items of concern like teenagers do. I teach high school, and those students in high school can be much more difficult to talk to feel like I'm relevant to them. For children, for me, I feel like they really look up to adults, or they want to learn from the adults that are around them. So like Remy, especially, I'm thinking about, I'm sure, certainly would not speak for all children there, but I find that, I think it's less daunting to try to like impress a kid with my knowledge than it is to try to impress my teenage students with knowledge or things that I know, because they think that everything I know is in fact invalid. So
Well, and this sort of is a slight trend now based upon some of the things we spoke about a few minutes ago. But I also really appreciate in young children, at least as I'm witnessing it, their ability to instantly become friends with someone,
yes, gosh,
with
yes, that's
no,
impressive.
yeah, with no preconceived notions, without judging, what color they're wearing, or how they have or have not cut their hair, anything like that. And certainly
Hmm.
it's different, obviously, for children who are quite young because their parents control all of that. But it's just so refreshing. And I think back to having gone to a very small high school where, everyone sort of had their moment, and then everyone had their kind of like bad period at one point or another. It's still just refreshing to see that connection that someone can have with another person around their age the moment they meet them.
Yeah,
Whereas I think, and one of the things that I want to talk about in a future podcast with two potential guests is sort of this epidemic of primarily male loneliness amongst
yeah,
Gen
yeah.
Z millennials. And there's a great book by Andrew McCarthy, who was an actor. I've not seen any of his films. They're like 80s. That's not true. He was in Weekend at Bernie's, and I saw 10 minutes of that when I was a kid.
Okay, yeah,
But
that's a
he's
funny
become
thing.
a travel writer.
I
And
did
so,
not know that.
yes,
Okay.
so he wrote a book in which he is, don't ask me the title because I don't remember, but he travels from New York, basically ends up on the West Coast. But along the way, he reconnects with friends of his who happen to be male who are, differing ages. I think he's maybe about 58 when he wrote the book. I think he's maybe 60 now. But he also interviews, sort of very casually and very briefly, people in all of these different geographic areas as he goes. And he was in Harper's Ferry, apparently,
Oh,
was one of
wow.
his stops. But it's very fascinating to me to think that, like, two boys or two girls, or a boy and a girl who are five, can become friends instantly, but someone who's 30 can struggle to make like one friend in a 6 month period in working in the same office with people.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you can work a lifetime with people and never and walk away with them still just being colleagues. And it's difficult. We live in a very uh, socially kind of challenging time. We're supposed to be more connected than ever. I think what we're more connected to than ever is our strive for, our chase for dopamine. And it's all very individualistic, how we all, approach that. We all have our own algorithms, and it can be very difficult to turn your head up away from the phone and to look at someone and figure out, like, what does it mean. It's way too challenging to try to be friends with someone. It's way easier to just chase dopamine on the phone. And I'm not on any social medias for that reason now. I think as an adult, for everyone, men and women, it's very difficult to make friends. And I think it's more important than ever to try to maintain those friendships and to make time for those things, because they find over and over that having friends and having close friends is like one of the greatest signs that you will have a long life, long and a healthy life. So
It's
yeah.
interesting. A friend of mine, we've been friends over 20 years now, told me once that, and I don't think he always practices this, but it really stuck with me. He said, "Once you enter my life, you never leave."
That's great.
And that connection, and he's lived on the West Coast for at least a decade, so I've not seen him in probably 15 years.
You don't leave his life, but he does leave your life.
But
Okay.
we still, on a consistent basis, although it's digital, whether it's texting or Facebook messaging or what have
Sure,
you,
sure.
communicate almost daily. And I think that that's so rare. But then we have an instance where, and two instances, obviously, I've not done a very good job of keeping up with you because I didn't realize you had two children. And,
Yeah, I'm not on any social media.
well, I mean, still. And then I have another friend who, and I hope he doesn't listen to this because he may retract, but he did me the absolute great honor of making me the godfather to his second child, his youngest son. Which, me of all people, when I told people that, they're just like, "Well, what's wrong with him?" It's just like that doesn't compute. But
Right.
I was so embarrassed because about a month and a half ago, I think the little boy, see, I don't even know how old the little boy is, but I couldn't remember his name, and I was so embarrassed. And I had to go back through all of these texts from the point where he was born to find out what his name was. So clearly, I'm failing at connecting with my godchild. It needs improvement. Hey, so a little addition to this podcast. Unfortunately, we had a technical difficulty from this point on, and Stefan and I are going to re record the last portion of the podcast. So that will be part two. But the first part went really well, so I did want to go ahead and offer that out to everyone. But again, apologies for it ending abruptly, and part two will be coming to you very soon.